Hello, welcome back to The Independent Pianist. I'm your host, Cole Anderson, and today's video is actually a viewer response video. I've had this request a couple times, I think from more than one person actually, to do Chopin's Black Key Etude, so here we are. This is actually one of the etudes I consider to be the most important out of the 24, or 27 if you count the Trois Nouvelles Etudes. So I really do think that if you only were going to learn two out of Chopin's etudes, I would recommend this one and Opus 25 number 1, just because the basic techniques that you develop in these pieces are so applicable to so many other areas of piano technique. Opus 25 number 1 develops the flexibility of your wrists and arms, what Chopin referred to as souplesse, this kind of suppleness and freedom, starting with the arms and wrist and also concerning the fingers as well. The Black Key Etude, though, is maybe even a more basic kind of piano technique, and this is accommodating your hands to the black keys. This etude, indeed, in the right hand is made up almost entirely of black keys. There's only one white key note in the entire piece in the right hand, and it's in a place which is not even figuration, it's just a chord towards the end. But otherwise, every single note is in fact on the black keys, which is what gives it a faintly pentatonic kind of sound to it. The left hand, of course, is freely using the white keys so that the tonality still remains pretty standard, but there is something kind of fun and just a little bit out of the ordinary, a little bit exotic about the sound. I'm sure it would have struck people at the time as being a little bit unusual sounding in that regard. So why is this technique so important? Well, for one thing, it opens up a whole world of piano technique that up to this time had been relatively unexplored. There was this idea that you generally wanted to avoid using your fifth finger and your thumb, the pinky finger and the thumb, on the black keys. Only the long fingers were supposed to be used on the black keys. And on the face of it, that makes sense. Generally speaking, you want to use your longer fingers on the black keys and shorter fingers on the white keys. However, there are certain technical challenges and sound effects that can be created once you allow yourself to use your thumb and your fifth finger on the black keys, particularly in passages where there are a lot of black keys being used. So this etude, to me, in microcosm, shows this kind of technique of how you have to play when you are accommodating your shorter fingers to the black keys, and also when you have a lot of black keys in a row. What composers discovered in the 19th century, Chopin and Liszt included among many others, was that keys with more black keys in them, like G flat major, D flat major, F sharp major, so forth, were actually a lot easier to play because it allows your longer fingers to stretch out a little bit to cover the black keys. So it's actually a more comfortable hand position. So, if you're playing all on the white keys, you kind of have to curve your fingers like this, whereas when you are playing with more of the black keys, the fingers can actually kind of straighten out into a more relaxed position. This motion of the fingers, actually, where the finger is slightly more extended like this, is actually a much more natural kind of way to use your finger than if the finger is very, very curved. There's a lot more going on. Different elements in the finger have to move to adjust to actually accommodate that. But when the finger is a little bit more extended like this, you only end up moving from this one joint, from the knuckle joint, which is actually much more natural, a much more natural kind of movement. So when you play this etude, you're going to find yourself using a flattened finger position to some degree. It varies depending on the makeup of your hand and the length of your fingers, but you're going to find yourself flattening out quite a bit, and you're going to be playing a little bit more on the pad of the finger rather than on the fingertip. There's this idea that only certain pianists play with flat fingers and that they play that way all the time. Famously, Vladimir Horowitz was supposed to be a pianist who played with flat fingers all the time. You could also mention someone like Art Tatum. But actually, this is a little bit of a misconception. It's true that in Horowitz's case, it's more obvious. He does use an extremely extended position for his fingers sometimes, but actually to a certain degree, all pianists use a flat finger technique sometimes when they are playing on the black keys in particular. The number one factor that influences whether you're playing more flat-fingered or with more of a curved finger position is whether you're on the white keys or the black keys. If you're playing a C major scale, you'll notice that your fingers are much more curved, whereas if you're playing a B major scale, for example, your long fingers are going to extend a little bit to accommodate accommodate the black keys. And that is perfectly okay. In fact, that's a good thing to do. However, even within this, to alter the tone quality, you can change the curvature of your fingers. If you want a slightly more svelte, velvety kind of sound, you can go for a straighter finger position, for a flatter finger position, where you're on the pads of your fingers and you'll get a much more soft kind of impact on the key. When the fingers are curved, you're going to tend to get a slightly more percussive, a slightly more articulated kind of sound. So you always have that option to curve the fingers or flatten them. Even if you're on the white keys, for example, it's possible to play with flat fingers in certain situations. So even someone like Horowitz, though, if you look at his videos, you can see that he actually plays with curved fingers quite a lot. So the whole idea that he only played with flat fingers is totally false, actually. It's just more noticeable when he does use flat fingers, and he played a lot of repertoire where a flat finger technique is actually very common because it has a lot of black notes in it and a lot of figuration where you have to flatten out your fingers. He's by no means the only one who did this. So that's one reason why I think this etude is so important, because it's just a masterclass in developing this technique of playing on the black keys. And actually, it's so comfortable. Once you figure out how to play in this way, it's actually so comfortable playing on the black keys. So this etude even ends up being not necessarily one of the most difficult ones once you've mastered it. It's a little bit mind-bending at first to consider only playing on the black keys with all this complicated figuration in the right hand. But yeah, once you've got it, it actually feels very, very natural and easy. So the idea here, the technical idea, is pretty simple. We have kind of an alternating figuration back and forth in the right hand. I guess it's a little bit akin to something like the Winter Wind etude, where you have this also kind of an alternating figuration. In this case, of course, it's on arpeggios because we're on the black keys, so you can't have something like a chromatic scale. Later on, Chopin varies the figuration a bit. He has, for example, this area where you have a trill alternating with a broken octave and various other types of arpeggio figuration. In this part, he has actually a little trill tremolo going on and then notes below and above it, which is quite a charming technique, and again, very comfortable once you figure it out. He integrates repeated notes into the figuration here. But that's about it. Those are really the figurations that he uses in this piece. The left-hand part is also very important in this piece, as in most of the Chopin etudes. It has a supporting role, but it kind of drives the musical discourse along. So you'll see we have this little up and down motive in the left hand embedded in the chords. And in what I've called the development section, this actually comes out a little bit more in the left hand. You have these little falling seconds in the left hand. And there's a wonderful kind of interplay between the right and left hand part here, where it almost sounds like the right hand is kind of taking over for the left hand after it's come out with this little motive. So it's quite charming and a lovely little detail. Toward the end of the development section, while the right hand is doing that kind of trill with the notes alternating below and above, the left hand drives this along as well with this kind of rising chromatic pattern. And actually, all the jumping around you have to do in the left hand is not easy either, so it's well worth taking the left hand by itself sometimes and trying to master that technique on its own. There are some other very interesting little details about how Chopin wrote this etude. For one thing, he uses some very interesting pedal marks which are not usually used in performance. And in fact, I ended up not really finding them to work on my piano setup either. I find that most people tend to play the opening dry without pedal, and it actually works very well that way. If you're in a resonant space, if you have plenty of reverb, if your piano is very warm. But I could imagine there would be situations where these pedal markings would in fact work. In particular, there's one very long pedal marking here, which is, I don't think I've ever heard anyone actually use this pedal marking, but I imagine that in certain circumstances this could in fact work. So it's worth trying, actually holding the pedal all the way through these 4 bars and then again for the next 2 bars. Undoubtedly, this probably would have worked really well on a Pleyel in Chopin's day, one of his pianos that he was using, which had a little bit less sustain. The tone of the chords in the left hand would have cleared a little bit more quickly on that instrument, but it might still work on certain instruments today, so you should at least try it out. I did try it on my piano as well, but as you can hear, it didn't really quite work. Another interesting little detail is towards the end. Chopin has this little cadenza, this little miniature cadenza in the coda, with the right hand having this scale going downwards. So here, I actually choose to play this as a glissando. I played in the right hand as a glissando, and I'm certainly not the first person who's ever done this. I know in Ignaz Friedmann's recording, he actually doubles it with the left hand and goes all the way down the keyboard. It's a very cheeky gesture that he makes. I just do a simple glissando in one hand, and I actually play exactly the notes that Chopin has written, but just in glissando form. And I really like this effect because I somehow can really get the timing just right, and it kind of makes it a little bit more pastel and relaxed in sound. So I kind of like that better than articulating with the fingers, using Chopin's fingering. Now, the only issue here is that maybe you could argue, well, that's all very fine, but you lose this little rhythmic thing here where he has the 30-second note and a 30-second rest. And that's fair enough. However, I'm actually of the opinion that this rhythm is not meant to be played exactly literally. You actually see this notation in other places in Chopin's music. He's basically the only composer I've ever seen, as far as I know, who uses this. It's a kind of odd little notation that seems to have been a quirk of his own. So you can also see something similar at the end of the A-flat Polonaise. I think what the notation means is that the first note is supposed to be extended a little bit, almost with a little mini fermata, and then you're supposed to rush through the next notes, kind of fit them in more quickly. And of course, there would have been clearer ways of notating that if that was indeed Chopin's intention. So I'm not exactly sure what his rationale was there. I just know that that interpretation instinctively seems to work a lot better than literally doing that rhythm in this place. Hi everyone, this is Cole Anderson from the editing floor jumping in. I did a little more research after finishing this video, and I was very interested to find that in this passage in Chopin's manuscript, the rhythm is actually reversed here. So that first E flat in the right hand is written as a 32nd note, then there's a 32nd rest, and all the other notes are 16ths. So evidently, in the first editions and in later Urtext editions, they considered this to be a mistake in the manuscript, but I'm of the opinion actually that it's the reverse, that the manuscript has it right and the other editions are a mistake. So in that case, this rhythm is notated exactly the same way as in the A-flat Polonaise, 32nd note, 32nd rest, followed by 16th notes. So in that sense, it's kind of like a phrase marking to mark the first note very short with a rest. I think that's probably the correct interpretation, and that supports the way that feels natural to play it anyway, and the way most people do play it. Most people don't actually differentiate the rhythm there. Okay, back to my originally recorded comments. All right, well, is there anything else to say about this etude? I don't think so. So let's just go on to the complete performance coming up here. Also, yeah, I wanted to put in another plug. I should have a new album coming out very soon, I think sometime this week, of the complete Premier Année de Pèlerinage by Franz Liszt. And I'm going to be coming out with a lot of albums in the near future, covering most of the repertoire that I put up on the channel so far, that you'll be able to find on all the major streaming sites, Spotify and so forth, all those kind of places. And I'll include links to those as well when they're finally up, and I'll keep plugging them here in the videos. Also, just wanted to reiterate, I have a concert on Vashon Island in Washington State on September 7th, 7:30 p.m. with a pre-concert lecture by yours truly at 6:30 p.m. playing a very nice program, Fanny Mendelssohn, Ravel, Miroir, and the complete Gershwin Etudes by Earl Wild. So if you happen to be in the area around Vashon Island in Washington and you want to come to that concert, please do get tickets. I have a link to where you can do that in the description box, and I'd love to see you there. But otherwise, I guess that's it for this week, so I will sign off. Enjoy the complete performance of the Black Keys Etude. Keep practicing and come back next week. I'll have some more music and conversation for you.